Mr. Biff the Boxer. There was once a man named Mr. Bob. Mr. Bob was a boxer. He was as fit as a fiddle. He was the toughest man in the town. He was the champion. There was another boxer in the town. His name was Mr. Biff. Mr. Biff was not as fit as a fiddle. He ate too many cream cakes. He drank too many bottles of beer. Mr. Biff was not tough. He liked to sit in an easy chair by a cozy fire. He liked to put his slippers on and read the paper. He slept in a feather bed. One day posters appeared in the town. They said, "Big charity fight Mr. Biff against Mr. Bob." Mr. Biff told his wife about the fight. "It's for charity," he said. "Me against Mr. Bob." "Oh dear," said Mrs. Biff. "They say he is the toughest man in the town." "They say his wife is the toughest woman too," said Mr. Biff. Mrs. Biff told the children about the fight. "It's for charity," she said. "Your dad against Mr. Bob." "Our dad will win," said Billy Biff. "He will beef him," Betty Biff said. "But your dad is not fit," said Mrs. Biff, "and he is not tough." "We will be his trainers then," said Billy Biff. "And toughen him up," Betty Biff said. "You wait and see." The next day, Mr. Biff began training. His family helped. Billy Biff took him running. Betty Biff took him skipping. Mrs. Biff hid his paper and his slippers. Bonzo Biff kept him out of the easy chair. The children also helped to toughen him up. Mrs. Biff helped to toughen him up too. Mr. Biff was put on a diet. "I'd like 3 cream cakes and a bottle of beer," he said. "You can have 3 carrots and a glass of water," said Mrs. Biff. Each day the children said, "How do you feel, Dad?" Each day Mr. Biff said, "I feel terrible." But one day the children say, "How do you feel, Dad?" And Mr. Biff said, "I feel as fit as a fiddle." Now it was the day of the fight. A big tent was put up in the town. Everybody was excited. Crowds gathered. The referee stepped into the ring. "My lords, ladies and gentlemen," he said. "On my right, Mr. Bob." Everybody cheered. "That's my husband," said Mrs. Bob. "On my left, Mr. Biff." Everybody cheered again. "That's my dad," Billy Biff shouted. The timekeeper rang his bell. Ding, ding. The fight began. Mr. Biff stepped forward. Mr. Bob stepped forward. Mr. Bob moved to the right. Mr. Biff moved to the left. Suddenly, Mr. Bob bopped Mr. Biff. At the same time, Mr. Biff biffed Mr. Bob. They biffed and bopped each other out. "It's a draw," the referee said. The timekeeper rang his bell. Ding, ding. The fight was ended. In the dressing room, Mr. Biff said, "How do you feel?" "I feel terrible," said Mr. Bob. "I think bopping people is silly. Beefing people is silly too," said Mr. Biff. Then Mr. Bob said, "I feel hungry as well. I have been on a diet." "Me too," said Mr. Biff. "I could just eat a cream cake now and a jam tart," said Mr. Bob. "And fishy and chips," said Mr. Biff. "And roasted chicken and potatoes and peas and bread and butter and a bottle of beer," Mr. Bob said. So that evening, the two families went out for a big dinner. Mrs. Biff made friends with Mrs. Bob. The Biff children made friends with the Bob children. Bonjo Biff shared a bone with the Bob dog, and a happy time was had by all. The end.